Thank you. That's that song I was talking about. Thank you. I love that song. It's beautiful. And how perfect, because I think each one of us found our way here, and it must not always have been an easy road, but we found our way here together. Good morning. I'm Reverend Bonnie, the community spiritual leader here at the center. And I am still basking in the message from last Sunday. For those of you that were here or saw it later, I just was so grateful again to Lisa Giuliano and Teresa Valenzuela for their message and what they brought us. And I'm just wondering, what did you all take home? Have you been contemplating any aspect of what they shared with you last week, those of you who saw it? Let me know. Anything that you've been thinking about? I can tell you what I've been thinking about. Authenticity. Okay. What else stuck with you for the week?
Something Brene Brown always says, choose discomfort now over resentment later.
Choose discomfort now over resentment later, Brene Brown, when you're talking about boundaries, because we talked about boundaries last week. Thank you. Anything else that was sticking with you from last week? I know we were thinking about it. We talked about it in community class, the book study as well. Well, what stuck with me, first of all, I was thinking about the vulnerability pyramid that she talked about, that Teresa shared with us, and where I might be on that and how it feels as we move up that pyramid. And then I thought about what Lisa shared with us about our energy, and what energy do we take into a situation, and how do we raise our energy to a higher vibration to bring about more of what we want to see in the world, instead of staying in that lower space that might be a little detrimental to people, like we heard in the reading when that guy's sitting on the bus. And I also thought about what Lisa said in terms of feeling a little bit uncomfortable as we move out of our homes post-pandemic. Now, I know we've been meeting here almost a year in person, but look, today we've got many more people than we even last week or the week before. So people are slowly starting to come out and feel more comfortable, feel stronger around each other. And yet I know that in the beginning, even still sometimes it feels a little risky, a little vulnerable as we go out among people. And as I was listening to the news, I listened in the car, on the way over here, I heard, I don't know how many stories on shootings. And I thought, not only is it the pandemic that makes us feel vulnerable when we go into crowds, but now we have to think about that, or we don't have to, but we might. That could be making us feel vulnerable when we go out of our homes. The pandemic told us it was safer to be home. It told us to stay home and be isolated was safer because it reduced our likelihood of being exposed to germs. And now we can also say it reduces our likelihood of being exposed to people who might want to do harm to a large crowd. But long before the pandemic, I lived with a mother who preferred to stay home. She was uncomfortable, I think, in groups of people. She liked being alone. She had a few, I can name maybe 2 people that I know that she considered her friends. And she would occasionally go out to lunch. It was a very formal affair when they did. It wasn't the way I think of friends, someone to just hang out with and share with. And she chose to be in a routine. She had a very strict routine all week long. She followed that routine, and getting out of it made her very uncomfortable. And she said that this was true because she found it uncomfortable to be around people when their thinking wasn't positive. She came out of a Christian Science household, and she found it difficult to maintain her positive thinking when she was around people who might be thinking in different ways than her. She especially found it challenging to be in a work environment because she said people there, all they wanted to talk about was their aches and pains and their illnesses and their problems. And she found it very hard to stay in her center while that was being shared around her. So in her mind, it was easier to be isolated, to keep her mind isolated so it would be free from mental germs, so to speak, from negativity. And so as we venture out into community, there are different ways that we can feel vulnerable or exposed, whether it's mentally, emotionally, or physically. And yet right now, in this community, we're talking about getting together as community and how to develop and grow our community. We're reading the book Community, And we're getting excited about what does our community want to express? What wants to be created through us as a community? And we also share this space with other communities. We share this space with Unity, another New Thought community. And there are several other groups that we share this space with throughout the week. And all of us, every group wants to grow. It wants to invite new people to the table. We want to see our table expand. And so the questions have come up. How do we do this? How do we do this and sometimes feel vulnerable at the same time as we grow? Because we have to then interact with new people, people we've never met before. And what happens when other groups grow? What happens to CSL? What happens to those groups if CSL keeps growing? And the question has come up, how do we know who we are and how it is that we might differentiate ourselves from the other groups, such as Unity, who teaches basically the same teaching, started in different places by different people who studied under the same teachers? How are we, or are we, different? Or how are we possibly vulnerable if there's any confusion around us? And what will people think of us? What could people think of us? And so as I keep thinking about this, we just celebrated Easter. And so I was thinking about and contemplating the life of Jesus and the role that his teachings have played in my life and in many people's lives in this country. And I thought about Reverend Terry, who was the Unity minister. She was also my friend and mentor and prayer partner for many, many years. And she always referred to Jesus as our elder brother and way shower. And over the years through New Thought and what I learned in religious science was that Jesus was seen and is seen as the great example, not the great exception. So what does that mean? It means that supposedly this man walked the earth, giving us an example of how we might live. The miracles were examples of what we might do. And it wasn't a great exception, like he was so different than us, but rather that we, and supposedly he said we could do these things and even greater things. And so the great example as opposed to the great exception. So I found it interesting as I'm contemplating all this and thinking about it and thinking about how do we look at Easter in this community. Again, thank you to Lisa for bringing in a beautiful explanation for how it is that we could view that as New Thought people. The universe always delivers. And the Unity magazine, happens to be Unity magazine that I also love along with our Science of Mind magazine, has an article in it this month, May, June, well, not this month, next month, May, June of 2023. And there's an article called The One About the Mustard Seed. And she starts the article off. This is Reverend Jackie Fernandez. When I think about what Jesus did really well, apart from my favorite miracle, turning water into wine, I think about storytelling and teaching, his friendship, grace, healing, and faith. Community. Jesus did community really well. He loved to break bread with friends, tell stories, challenge the status quo, and wherever he went, the crowds always followed. Well, I've been looking at our book on community, and I've been thinking about spirituality, and I've been like, how do we pull these things together? And yet she's saying right in here, community is integral to the spiritual journey. One could even surmise that community is necessary to among us in that connective tissue in the space between us. I just loved that. So the kingdom of heaven is in the company that we keep. It's right here in this room. It's in this room because we are in this room, because each one of you are in this room. That's what's creating that essence of the kingdom of heaven right here, right now on earth. The kingdom of heaven is made up of who we share our space with. And so as I combined this thought from her article and looking at who we are as a community with the idea then from our community book, this is on page 55, 54, starting there to 55. The author, if you're not familiar, is Peter Block. He said, this spirit of restoration promises a different future for our communities. The idea of community restoration becomes concrete when we grasp the importance of language. When we do, we can see how our language or conversation is the action step that makes creating an alternative future possible. And he wraps up that paragraph by saying, for greatest effect, we need a new conversation with people we are not used to talking to. We need a new conversation with people that we aren't used to talking to. So who are the people that we're not used to talking with? Who might they be? Do we isolate ourselves, either individually or as a community, from others that we're not comfortable speaking with, or maybe we just never have? Maybe we don't even know whether we'd be comfortable or not. Are we like my mom, who prefers to stay home where it's safe, where we can control our thoughts and control what comes in? Or are we open to being curious and having those conversations with people that we're not used to conversing with? Because that is what I think this book is telling us we need to be able to do. And that's what I think the example of Jesus was. Think of all the people that he was reported to convert, be with, just hang out with, to be around. Again, she said in the article, he was inclusive, intentionally seeking out those who were generally loathed by society and daring others to cast the first stone. When and if we hang out with people that are loathed by society, how do we feel? What goes on? Are we comfortable conversing with people that we might not normally hang out with? Do we feel vulnerable? Do we feel guilty by association? Yeah, I've shared before that I was part of the Codependence Anonymous 12-step program for many, many years. Yeah. And at the time when I first started, my partner got upset because she said, if you go to that meeting, people are going to think I'm an alcoholic. Guilty by association. But think about it. Are we ever concerned about what others might think? And who we're hanging out with? Like our reading, do we feel vulnerable around people whose consciousness might be in a different space than ours? Do we feel like it might be contagious in some way? Our community book says, who do you want to invite to the table? Who can we invite? And then how do we feel when we've invited people we're not used to conversing with? Here at the Center for Spiritual Living, we have invited many people to the table. We've invited Unity to share our building. We've invited Narcotics Anonymous and AA groups. We've invited Singing Out, which has mostly LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and their allies in the singing group. We have TOPS, Taking Off Pounds Sensibly, who all meet in this building. Do we ever worry about how people will perceive us if we come here? And what groups we might be associated with? When I first moved here, I had someone say, oh, you're part of that church where the crazy persons are? I'm like, well, yeah. So how do people perceive us? And are we concerned about that? Do we worry about people, what people will think, and how we might be confused with each other? And does it really matter? How do we maintain who we are in that sense of feeling vulnerable about having our own identity and being around and conversing with people who have a different identity. Our individualized expression of God, and each person has that individualized expression. Like I said, our community shares this space with another New Thought community, and we are part of a larger community that has two other New Thought communities in it. Who are we and who are they? And how do we have an identity and still recognize our oneness? We have invited many people to our table. Are we afraid of confusion, guilt by association, so to speak? Or are we excited about and willing to have conversations with people who we've not been used to having conversations with? Now, 2 weeks ago when I spoke, I promised you I would read Brene Brown, and so I did. And here's your first quote from her. Vulnerability is the willingness to show up and be seen with no guarantee of the outcome. Last week, Teresa spoke to the importance of good boundaries and knowing who we are and what we need. And when we have a strong sense of self and who we are, I believe then we can walk freely among people like Jesus did and share our light. And we don't have to worry about psychic contagion or whatever it might be out there. We can hold tight to who we are. But this is another both and situation, because Lisa talked about and gave us the example of what happens when you have a favorite color. Remember, we took our favorite color and we stood here like this, and my favorite color is the best one, of course. Okay, so we stood there in that energy of, I think mine is the best. And we felt what that felt like. And then we shifted to opening to talking to other people and hearing about their experience. And so we got a sense of what it's like to be stuck in our way without being able to be open to other people. So again, I think it's both and. Clear boundaries are important. Knowing who we are and what we stand for is important. And we need to still be open to other people and their experiences, their favorite colors. And so I was thinking about this. Consider that God knows no boundaries except as expressed through us. I didn't read that anywhere. That popped into my head this week. God knows no boundaries except as they are expressed through us. We are all one. The teaching is oneness. So there is Center for Spiritual Living, and there is unity. In God, it's all one. There's New Thought, and there's mainstream Christianity, Muslim, Judaism, Sikh, all kinds of other religions. In God, it's all one. Here in this region, we have Las Cruces with NMSU. We have El Paso with UTEP. We have Albuquerque with UNM. There's a lot of competition that goes on there. In God, we are all one. We have blue states and red states. We have people who vote blue and red. In God, we are all one. And then in this continent, we have the US and Mexico and Canada with boundaries and borders. In God, we are all one. And I thought about the various races and gender expressions. We could go on with a list of ways that humans express in the world, that individualized expression. And yet the kingdom of heaven includes all of us. The kingdom in heaven is one. And so I think community is that. It's the kingdom of heaven expressed on earth. Seek ye first the kingdom, and all else shall be given unto you. And so if we're seeking first the kingdom, that is the community. We're seeking first the inclusion of everyone, the God qualities as they express in and through everyone, and then everything else is given after that. So we think about, and we've been talking about, the gifts that we bring to our community and to the world and to our life. We talk about, in the community book, focusing on possibility. And so when I thought about possibility, then I thought the kingdom of heaven on earth is possibility. It is community. That is how it is that we're allowing ourselves to express that kingdom on this planet. And so again, we ask, what is it that we want to create? What is being created through us as we gather right here this morning and as we come together throughout the week? And we are creating that community with new people as well as our current friends, as well as the people that we've been comfortable with meeting here throughout the years. So it might feel vulnerable because there's newness, and because we are being invited to have conversations with people that we're not used to having conversations with. And yet, I think as we open our arms from that stance and have that willingness to be open to that community that is wanting to be created, that's what's the amazing gift that's happening right here. So Brene Brown, number 2, vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. So like I said at the beginning of this talk, I think sometimes stepping out of our isolation, out of our homes, whether it's self-imposed isolation or whether it was otherwise imposed, takes courage. We feel vulnerable on many levels. And yet Ernest Holmes also said something similar to Reverend Jackie in that Unity article. And this is from the Science of Mind text. We are not to suppose that the physical act of fasting or the metaphysical act of prayer can move the throne of grace to a kindness which is otherwise withheld. That's tricky. Or not to suppose that faith or fasting and prayer is going to basically change anything in that realm, making God bestow grace on us that isn't already there. God plays no favorites. And the law of the universe cannot reverse its own nature. Fasting and prayer often do bring our thoughts closer to reality, not because of the fasting or the prayer, but because they open up greater fields of receptivity in our minds. Because they open up greater fields of receptivity in our own minds. So that time spent alone, the fasting, the prayer, the meditation, the alone time, these tools that we do teach here, open our minds to something greater, to where we can receive more. They open our minds to receive what I would call our good. They open our minds to experience the kingdom of heaven here on earth. They open our minds to the gifts that we have and the gifts that are being given through our community. And they open our minds to receive the strength that we need within that sense of vulnerability when we move out into community. So when we consider having new conversations with people we're not used to having conversations with, did any one of you wonder, well, what are we going to talk about? We don't have anything in common. We often think that, oh, we don't have anything in common with them. How can we have a conversation? What are we going to say? There's hands raising. And I had to ask the question, do conversations only work when we have things in common? No. So what do we talk about? We've been told, don't talk about religion, money, or politics.
Or family.
Or family, somebody's added. Or your aches and pains. But one of our main topics here is what? God, love, religious science, religion. It's a form of religion. It's a form of spirituality. We actually provide a place. That's part of the gift we bring this community. This is a place where we can have conversation about what we believe, what spiritually feeds us. And it can be a variety of different things, but we can come together here and listen to each other, sharing what it is that we believe in and what we've studied, what philosophies we are connected to, and this thing called religious science. We talk about it here. And in order to do that, we need and we value this space, this building, because this is where we come together. And in order to have this space and this building and to have it open and comfortable, it requires money. It requires money to keep the lights on, the heating and cooling, which I was laughing before because there's people out there wrapping up and I'm sitting here fanning. So we, we have differences of experience when it comes to heat and cool. But it requires money to keep the place clean. We pay a cleaning person. It requires money for upkeep. Many people have mentioned the way the place looks on the outside and their concerns, but it just doesn't, we don't go poof and it happens. It requires money to keep the place staffed, to pay for the music, to pay for videographers, to make us accessible on Zoom. And yet, discussing money is a no-no. It is taboo because it makes us uncomfortable. It makes us feel vulnerable. And I thought, isn't it interesting that when we don't think we have enough money, or if we don't have enough money, we start to feel vulnerable. If we don't have money, we feel like we won't have food or shelter, and without food and shelter, we feel vulnerable. And yet we have made it taboo to talk about the very thing that we humans have created that bring us what we need to help us feel safe and alive. What's that about? Shelter and food. So we talk about saving money for a rainy day, saving money to create a cushion, a safety net, or even a nest egg. All of that is to help us feel safer, but we can't talk about it. We can't talk about it. Since I've been serving here as a minister, and there are people in the room who remember these days, there have been things behind the scenes, so to speak, that the board and I have had to be concerned about. Such things as we got very close to having the electricity turned off several years ago. We have had discussions at board meetings about cutting staff people's hours. We had several meetings in a row where that was discussed, and the staff finally said to me, we can't work under these conditions. We can't work thinking every month you're going to come back and tell us that you might cut our hours. So the board made a decision that we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to trust Spirit to provide us with the funds to pay the staff and keep the hours the same. And so far, it has worked even through the pandemic. We trusted in Spirit to provide the renovations on the inside of the building, which we have had. It was an interesting way, that hail damage and the insurance money, but it got done. We have been well provided for. We've never had to turn the electricity off. We've renovated, we've made decisions to keep the staff hours the same, and we've made it through the isolation of the pandemic, all while trying not to talk too much about money. Trying to not create a sense of vulnerability, because we would feel vulnerable if it turned people off. If people didn't come back because we talked about money. So the focus, what we're learning in the community book, is to keep the focus on possibility, what we do have. We didn't want to feel vulnerable broaching a taboo topic, and yet we've had some of those discussions over the last year or so as we've created our legacy committee as well. Brene Brown again, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. And I thought, well, maybe it's having the courage to show up and have those conversations when you can't control the outcome. Having the conversations with people we're not used to having conversations with. And in addition to talking about our gifts, I bet there are ways to have new conversations around religion. We talk about God and spirituality here, about money when we focus on possibility, what we could do. Anybody ever ask you what you would do if you had $1 million? Let's look at possibility instead of focusing on lack. And I bet we could even talk about politics. We could move out of my color's the best. We could get curious. I know I see a lot of concerned faces. But we have people on both sides of the aisle in this room. We could have conversations with curiosity, being open, remembering that we are all one, and looking for possibility and potential in what we want to see in the world. And then we can have those conversations. I at least think we possibly could. Brene Brown, your last two quotes from her today. Vulnerability is the birthplace of connection and the path to the feeling of worthiness. Vulnerability is not about fear and grief and disappointment. It is the birthplace of everything we are hungry for. And aren't we hungry for connection? Aren't we hungry for belonging? Aren't we hungry for community? Oh, and the music came just at the perfect time. I don't know whose phone is playing that for us, but it's lovely. So let's take a chance on community. Let's take a chance on those new conversations, the community that's being revealed through those new conversations with people that we aren't used to conversing with. Let's take a chance on exposing our true nature. And like Ernest Holmes said in the reading that Judy did for us earlier, each town, each city and nation has its individual atmosphere. So what is the atmosphere that is being created here? What is the atmosphere that is being created among us and wants to be created in and through us? How is the Christ consciousness, as exemplified by Jesus, walking among us and as us right now? Let's take a chance on shining the light of our divinity in the presence of each other. Let's take a chance on sharing our space and continuing to share our space. There is no question we will. That's not up for grabs. I'm just saying, let's think about it. Let's shift our consciousness a bit as we share our space and invite new people to the table, despite any possible confusion in regard to their identity and ours. Let's take a chance and risk feeling vulnerable. Let's take a chance and throw our gifts into the ring and see what this community wants to create. So again, I'm going to invite you to stay for the visioning. We're looking at what this space looks like as we are a presence in this community. We'll see what wants to come through the visioning process. So if you'd like to stay and join us after, let's take a chance together. And so it is. So it is. And we have a practitioner in the room. Jennifer, if you'd like to stand, you may as well and hold the space for us. Thank you again, Jennifer, for filling in for Bob this morning.
Hi, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. It takes a village. It takes this entire community, and we help each other between our communities as well. So I'm grateful to have Reverend Jennifer here this morning. Let's go within and just take a moment to breathe into that space. Our heart space, that space where we know we are one, we are connected, and allow ourselves to consider our own individualized expression, the comfort that we feel in our own skin, opening to a deepening awareness that allows us to move comfortably in community, that allows us to know who we are and yet not be closed to who others are. That allows us to be so comfortable we can open our arms and welcome new people to the table, people we're not used to conversing with. We are so grateful for this teaching, for the community that is flourishing right here before our eyes this morning, and as it continues to grow through those who join us on Zoom and watch us on YouTube and beyond, we continue to have that spirit of welcoming and invitation, knowing that as we all grow in this teaching and this awareness of oneness, it blesses the world. We can see that world that works for everyone, and we find ourselves stepping more fully into it. How grateful I am for this time and this space and this place to come together. I know each one of us here is blessed. Each one of us is blessed by those that are sitting right next to us, everyone in this room, and everyone who shares these rooms throughout the week. We are blessed. And so in gratitude, we just release these words and these ideas, knowing that there is an amazing thing happening here in spirit as we say together, and so it is. Thank you.